Yeah, welcome to all of you, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about asynchronous digital teaching and learning for the next 45, 50 minutes or so, with a break in between. I will also introduce myself, but prior to that, I would like to say something about the general concept of this workshop. Well, can I call it workshop? Well, we will see. The general idea is that I am the host of an asynchronous digital teaching and learning workshop, which is run in an inverted concept. So what does that mean? Well, we will start with a preliminary webinar. This is what we're doing now. I took this photo from elsewhere, so don't be worried you're not visible like this in a photo. This workshop or this webinar will last an hour between now and 2 o'clock. And the goal of this webinar is to set the foundations, all the theoretical background, the scenario, the felicity conditions for asynchronous teaching and learning, and so on. So after this webinar, we could theoretically go straightforwardly into a workshop. However, there's an intermediate step beyond the 26th of October, today's webinar. The intermediate step is that you can all become part of the online course Education 21, 21st Century Education, a special version for online Educa in Berlin. And the workload of that one is 2 hours between now, the 26th of October, and the 25th of November, when we might meet in Berlin. And this course is dedicated to experience. You will take over the role as a student. You will experience what it means to enter into self-paced learning, what it means to document your own knowledge. Because I don't think it makes sense talking about all these things, just talking, without having the experience of ever having been part of an online course. Well, after this, and I will say something about how you can access this course at the end of today's session. After this, we will meet in Berlin, where I do not want to have any theoretical discussion anymore. There we will practice. Practice, practice, practice. I won't stand in front of you in this workshop, which will last for 3 hours in Berlin on the 25th of November. I think it's in the afternoon, but we have to check the program. In this workshop, we will create digital content and we will create simple electronic assessment. We will not talk about it. We will actually do it. And this is my premise, not just talking about these things, but doing these things. Today, however, we have to talk about the presentation and the delivery of content in general. Now, I told you I will introduce myself. I don't want to tell you all about my achievements. Rather, I want to talk about the mistakes I made and the errors I made and the big problems I had in installing digital teaching and learning scenarios at my own university. The whole development started with this computer. Now, it's a pity that I can't see your faces because then I would be able to guess your age. This was 1983 when I had this home computer, which you had to program in a programming language called BASIC. Also, you could use Pascal. I used it to sort the bibliography of my doctoral thesis alphabetically. Yes, I wrote my doctoral thesis on a typewriter. But I also did something else. I created a little linguistic model. My background is linguistics and languages. And this linguistic model, I took with this computer into one of my seminars, connected it to a TV screen, and now I could show something which I could not show in books, which I couldn't show on an overhead projector, which I couldn't show on a blackboard. And I had to find out there's something which I call the multimedial benefit. Multimedia was now the keyword which I used for at that time, which I have used ever since. In the 1990s, and now I'm talking about the team, we created CD-ROMs for my subject, linguistic CD-ROMs. And we had a very strange idea. The idea was, give each student one CD, put the students into a computer room equipped with many computers. I placed myself in the corner and then told the students, go through chapter 1. Nothing happened. And the evaluation of my seminar was a catastrophe. It was terrible. The students damned me to hell. It was a complete failure, and the failure was even strengthened by the newspapers. The local newspapers wrote, "Computer replaces professor." That even activated my colleagues who hated me for a long time at that time, and I had no answer. The answer you will find out later is that whenever you present digital material to your students, they need guidance. And this guidance wasn't available in 1996. By the way, I want to give you an example of multimedial benefit in showing an example from my subject. The example is simple. I want to present the 8 diphthongs in present-day English. If you're not a linguist or anyone who's interested in languages, you might not know what diphthongs are. Diphthongs consist of 2 vowels, and they sound like I, oi, o, ear, ur, and so on. And you have to present them somehow. Now, if you do that with classical methods, you get this result. This is the result of a recent Google search. And this is what books do. This is what people do on blackboards. This is what people do on in PowerPoint even. But do you find this useful? Well, rather confusing, I would say. The multimedial solution is completely different. It presents the 8 diphthongs and then allows interactivity. So let me show the interactivity. Oops, now I'm on the wrong screen. Here we are. And there we are. And now you see the diphthongs here, and I can roll over with my cursor. I see the diphthong, the second part of the diphthong, and I can hear
boy.
I can hear
boy.
A sound and an example word at the end. So this is the multimedial benefit. And one of my central ideas about presenting digital content is that we need to generate multimedial benefit. Let's return to the development. In 2000, we started developing the Virtual Linguistics Campus, which now is the largest platform on the web for linguistic courses. In 2009, we started using electronic exams, but they were dedicated to knowledge checks. And it took another 7 years before I realized that today, in the 21st century, we shouldn't check knowledge anymore, because the knowledge, as my American colleagues often said, the knowledge is on the web. Why should we check something which is available around the clock for everyone? So in 2016, we changed our electronic exams to competence exams. And instead of using knowledge questions, we used competence check questions. And instead of using proctoring, that is the supervision of the participants, we allowed the internet in the electronic exams, thus creating open book exams. Some of you might know my background, that we started using humanoid robots in 2018, but we had to stop this development with the rise of the pandemic, Corona pandemic, because, believe it or not, humanoid robots are social beings just like humans, and contact was no longer possible. Today, we have the Virtual Linguistics Campus with these participants and courses and components. The whole Virtual Linguist Campus is an open educational resource platform. That is, all the material can be reused, with us being mentioned as authors. And we have the YouTube channel where earlier this year we were awarded the Silver Award by YouTube by cracking the 100,000 subscribers barrier. So this is my background with the essential lessons I was taught: guidance, multimedia, open book exams. So what we will do now are simply two things. I will look at teaching and learning scenarios, and we will look at the felicity conditions. And after part one, we'll take a short break where I will ask you a question, or where I will look at the chat. By the way, if you want to find out about my attitude towards teaching and learning during or after COVID-19, you can download this here via this YouTube link, where you can see my last year's contribution to the OEB plenary debate in a nutshell. Okay. Now, let's look at the teaching and learning scenarios. And when in doing this, we have to ask two central questions. What role does basic knowledge play in today's academic subjects, and how can we teach it? Now, in order to answer these questions, I want to ask you a question. What is the proportion of basic knowledge in your subject? Okay, and in order to do this, let's use a software package, namely Pingo. And I kindly ask you to take out your smartphones or to use a second tab on your computer where you're sitting at the moment and type in the browser line pingo.coactum.de. So please do that right now. We take a few seconds in order to get at least some of you to answer this question. Now, once you have typed this line, pingo.coactum.de, you will see this screen on your smartphone or your computer, and you will be asked to type in a number. Please type the number 102334, 102334. And once you click on Rock the Vote, your smartphone will change into this position and tell you, please wait. Okay, once more, and then we should be done. Pingo.coactum.de. Then here is the screen. 102334 is the number. And here you see your smartphone. Okay. And now I will ask a question. And you have 30 seconds time to answer this question. And here it is. How high is the proportion of basic knowledge to be taught in the content of a BE degree program in your subject? Okay, here are your answers. You can see your answers, and in looking at these answers, I feel very much supported in previous votes. This, by the way, is called live voting. And if I go back to my screen now, you see this is the answer I received as a combination, a collection of answers of several workshops, where professors, if I ask only professors, they think, well, it hovers around 60%, and other academics are a little bit lower, but we can say around 50% of the content we deliver in our classes, irrespective of the subject, is basic knowledge. And the main question I want to ask now is, how is basic knowledge made accessible? How do we teach it, actually? Well, We should no longer teach it by means of frontal in-class teaching, but, and here is my first premise, we should deliver content so that students can acquire the content asynchronously, that means at any time, and self-directed, that is, they are responsible for how they acquire the content. This is the first premise, and I'm not supporting these premises anymore by any publications. We've published so much since 2012 in the Inverted Classroom Conference contributions. There's no point in saying anything about this anymore. This is simply a premise which we can take for granted if we look at the multimedia benefit and interactivity and all these options which digital content now offers. By the way, if we consider this model here as a course, we can call it Massive Open Online Course, a course without tuition. Now, we all know, if we are familiar with Massive Open Online courses, that they have very low accomplishment rates, completion rates, 2 to 3%. And even in the Virtual Linguistics Campus, where we have adhered to all these multimedia and other rules, we have completion rates of about 10 to 12%. But that's not enough. That's not enough for academic education. We need more. And in order to complete this model, we need an in-class phase, a second phase, where we say, okay, we have to deepen the knowledge somehow. And that deepening process is, of course, synchronous. That is at a particular time, in a particular place, and it is tutored by an academic. So this is a new model, the model which somehow swaps the activities. What was in class in the past is now outside. That is the delivery of content. And what was outside class, that is homework, can now be done in class by means of academic tuition. The big question that arises now, and it all hinges on this question, is how do we structure the digital content? That's the main question, and I'm still surprised that most people do not address to that question, because it's the most crucial question in the whole model. If the digital content is not structured in a particular way, the model will not work. So let's look at the options. The simplest option is that we say, okay, the digital content are simple educational videos. This model is used at school, and to some extent it works at school. You present your pupils with a short video, let's say about the electoral system of Great Britain, the rule of 3. They watch the video, something like 5 minutes duration. And on the next day, they turn up in class and deepen that knowledge by doing, well, homework on the basis of that video. This model is called the flipped classroom. However, as early as 2012, at our first Inverted Classroom conference, the American guests said, learning is not just video. And I'm so sure about this, that video is not enough surely not in the academic context. Learning is not just video, we need more. We need what I already prayed, multimedia content, that is text, video, images, simulations, animations, and of course we need a learning management system. A system which administers the multimedia data and which generates results and user data. So the content is multimedia. Nevertheless, this model is still too simple. We call it inverted classroom in order to show the difference between the simple flipped classroom and the inverted classroom on the academic level, but it's not enough. And the main question arises, how can we guarantee that the students who come to phase 2, to the synchronous in-class meeting, are well prepared and have mastered the digital content? we can do so by inserting a mastery component. The model is now the inverted classroom mastery model. And mastery simply means that we have to implement mechanisms where the students can show that they have mastered the content. To put it in a simpler way, we need assessment. Electronic assessment, of course. Now, this is the model, and well, in general, we could say it works. However, there's still one little problem. The problem is often addressed, was often addressed to me in workshops where the participants said, are the students in a position to, are they capable of self-directed asynchronous learning? Can they actually do this? And I had to admit that there are students who can't. And for these students, we added a specific tutorial and a fifth premise, which says in phase one, the asynchronous phase, tutoring would be of great benefit. Now, this is not tutoring in the classical sense. What we did at university, we reserved an entire afternoon from 12 to 6, had 3 students tutors available in a particular room, and students who were interested could contact them and ask for help. This is a relatively useful phase, but it depends a little bit on your budget and the availability of tutors. Okay, we're almost ready. One thing which I often mention to universities and other institutions, if you apply such a 21st century teaching and learning model, then you need new learning spaces. You need a space where students can actually go into self-directed learning. Internet access, electric current, laptops should be available. The tutorial depends, of course, on the availability of tutors and your budget. And in the seminar, it does not make sense to have lecture halls with rows, with the typical row architecture, because there you cannot collaborate. This is the model. And now we have to talk about the felicity conditions, that is the conditions that make this model really work, because the model alone will not work. But before we do this, I would like to look into the chat. So you can take a deep breath. I will look into the chat and let's see what questions there are. Oh, let's look at this. Who defines what basic knowledge is a question by Peter Isaacson. Well, that's of course part of your subject. You have to define it, and it depends a little bit on the subject. In my subject, linguistics, almost everything is basic knowledge because linguistics is not taught at school. So terms like the subject of a sentence or past tense are all basic knowledge. So yeah, Pingo, the time was not enough. Okay, it doesn't matter, but you saw the result. Can we use this application in our courses, is a question. Well, you can use all material from the Virtual Linguistics Campus. If you're interested, contact me afterwards. There are lots of examples of digital survey tools that are also integrated within LMS. Yes, I know, but I have been using Pingo for a very simple reason, and not Kahoot and Mentimeter, Ars Nova. There's so much around. Because in this system, I have 500 questions, and I'm too lazy to transfer them to another system. So that's the answer to that question. And premise 3 is so true, is what Anati Olsinger wrote. So thank you very much for this conversation, for this support. Okay, let's continue now with part 2. Here are the main questions. Which enabling structures are required? Organization of digital content, and very importantly, how should we design the in-class phase? Because there are so many people who are afraid of this model because they do not know what to do in class. That's why I will spend some time on that point. Let's first of all look at the enabling structure. Here is the model. Tutorial is optional, depends on the budget. I said this, mentioned this beforehand. Now, first of all, we need a unit in our institution which supports us in the development of and maintenance of digital content, unless you can do everything your own, which is the exception rather than the rule. So web design is at stake here. Then we need assessment. The enabling of e-assessment. First of all, the electronic assessment in the course itself and electronic assessment outside. Well, I use Pingo. The suggestion was made that in the platforms, whether it's Moodle, Elias, or whatever, or Canvas, you have integrated question answering systems. So live voting would be at stake there. Self-directed learning has to be enabled. I mentioned that already. So you should feel well when you enter into self-directed learning. You should have nice places at your institution where you can actually do this. Collaborative learning in class. Here is an image of a room which looks nice, where we want to be in order to collaborate with our fellow students. So that's also necessary. And finally, we need data for learning analytics and educational robotics, and this can only be generated from the digital resources. Let me say a little bit about learning analytics and robotics. So learning analytics, once more, is dependent on data. Now, the data can be easily generated from such a model. In classical teaching and learning, you have no digital data unless you organize an Excel table or something like that. But that's not digital data you need. You need big data, test data, activity data, and so on and so forth, which you can generate from the platform, and where you could, for example, that's another 21st century method, apply a chatbot. So a chatbot with which or with whom the students can get into contact. The same could be something we tried in the project HEART, which you can find on the web. We analyzed the big data and transferred the data to a conversational chatbot using humanoid robots. And humanoid robots, by the way, can also be used in the in-class meetings, so in the seminar or the tutorial, because they have the data available about students, and so they could support the class instructor very efficiently. Well, something we showed before 2020. Let's now look at the digital content. The digital content from a theoretical perspective. In Berlin, on the 25th of November, we will create digital content. But now let's first of all look at it. Here is a course, a new course. Believe it or not, I'm a linguist and my colleague is a dental surgeon, and we generate the course, are generating the course, Exploring the Solar System. It'll be available on the 10th of November on the Virtual Linguistics Campus. So this is our sort of hobby. It's a course which consists completely of content from the web. All texts, all images, all videos have been downloaded, have been used, have been embedded, have been modified from material from the web, and they all involve correct referencing to the original sources. The course consists of 12 learning units, where one learning unit is the equivalent of what someone could teach in 90 minutes in class in a frontal presentation. Each learning unit consists of multimedia content, my first lesson, of mastery tests, that is, tests where students can document the mastery, of guidelines. Remember what happened in 1996 when I didn't have any practical material that informed the students of what to do. And it consists of suggestions for in-class activities, because each of our courses can also be used in inverted classroom mastery scenarios, where we make suggestions of what can be done in class. And now something which makes us frightened. The multimedia or the content, the digital content itself. You can see all the data here, web pages, images, videos, all the videos. We didn't create the videos. We are using videos from the web and embed them on our website. How this is done and what you do here, what you can do, will be shown in Berlin to the participants of the workshops. A glossary is important. Each course needs a glossary, a course-specific glossary, and one glossary for the entire subject. There are so many entries which permanently reappear, whether it's opposition or conjunction in astronomy, whether it's a subject, object, and verb in a linguistic course. All these are glossary entries which should not be part of the courses themselves. We need test questions for the mastery tests. At the moment, we don't have enough. We have to create more. And we have 17 questions per learning unit. 10 questions are actually asked. So that's the multimedia material you need for a course. This is frightening, I know. But below this standard, you will fail in delivering digital content in a suitable way. We deliver this content with 2 professors and 3 students, assistants at the moment. We're developing that content. And we started on the 1st of July, and we reckon 6 months would be required to generate the course. We're a little bit faster. As I said, 10th of November is now the deadline for making the course available on the web. Let's now look at one unit, the digital content unit. This has been taken from this course, from the unit, the exploration of the moon. The unit consists of content. The content are individual websites, and they are structured in such a way that the students study the content on the screen. They don't print out anything. So everything should be self-explanatory, should be interactive, and should be ready for learning on the screen. And then each unit has a mastery test. By the way, in Berlin, in November, I will define the content as something like around 15 web pages. It says here 1 to n pages, n should be 15 at maximum. Beyond the assessment and the content, we have the guidelines. That's a sort of initial component, which we termed how to proceed. It tells the students what to do next. Where should I start? There are questions to be answered. There are topics to be defined, competences to be defined, and so on. And finally, if you use the course in an inverted classroom scenario, then suggestions for in-class activities. If you use a course as a MOOC, then you can look at these suggestions and try on your own. So this is a digital content. The content should, of course, operate on a smartphone, on mobile devices, because we all know our students try to do the mastery test as close to the in-class meeting as possible. Very often, they told me they've done the mastery test while sitting on the bus. And this should be possible using digital mobile devices. Now, something about the quality. The quality of the digital content should be as high as possible. Text, images, video, simulations, animation, interactivity where possible. Since that sometimes does not suffice, we need incentives. For example, and I will come back to this in a second, digital badges. Sort of badges you're awarded if the content is acquired deeply enough. We need assessment in all sorts of areas of a course, not only in the digital part, but also in the in-class meetings. This is why I played this little bingo game with you in live voting. And we need well-planned in-class activities. It does not suffice to go into class with a simple document and 5 questions on it. No, you have to prepare this in advance very, very well, and it is work. And then, of course, permanent evaluation. Your course and your material might be too complicated, it might be too easy, so ask your students what they think about the material. Invite them to cooperate with you in the creation of the content and the questions. And finally, the guidelines I mentioned earlier on, 1996 CD-ROM experience, never leave the students alone. So these are the conditions. Let's now look at the scenarios which take place, and I would like to start with self-directed learning. This is what it looks like. I told you I've often been asked, can students actually perform self-directed learning? Are they in a position, are they able of doing this? Well, these photos suggest they are. Learner groups on the corridor, learner groups on the floor, 2 students to the right, 6 students on the left. But as I said, there's an option to have a tutor in such scenarios, optionally for the students to receive support whenever necessary and if possible. What about the incentives? Incentives, well, I already mentioned the badges. Here are 3 badges which have some sort of intriguing names. You can, in the unit, the exploration of the moon, you can become a Loon expert. In Mercury, you become a Mercury star, or you can become the true Martian if the mastery tests are passed successfully. So you need this sort of incentive. Another incentive in the how to proceed section are the guiding questions. Guiding questions are extremely important, we found over the years. They not only serve as the basis for content acquisition, we keep saying to our students, if you can answer these 9 questions, then you have enough knowledge acquired about the exploration of the moon. And if you can't, if you don't know what bound rotation in question number 3 is, click on the hyperlink and you receive the explanation within the content unit, content activities of this unit. Tutorial is important, we talked about this. And finally, certification. Certificates can be handed out for courses at the end, the statements of accomplishment, as we call them. However, it's always also possible to generate intermediate certificates, where the students, let's say, get a certificate for the first 3 units, and then for the next 3 units, and for another 3 units, and so on. That may motivate them to do something on top of the badges. So these incentives, they are working. We have been using them for a number of years, and they are successful. What about the in-class meeting? Well, first of all, if you go into the in-class meeting, that is phase 2, you first of all take a look at the data that is generated via your platform. The data can be the test data. The data can be the activities that have been gone through in class. They can be additional questions. They can be questions from the forums of a particular course, and so on. And from these data, you can generate a table which tells you very precisely how well prepared your students are. Here, for example, in a previous workshop with only 8 participants, 5 of the 8 participants had looked at the activities of the first 2 units, that is 62% in each case, and the mastery test 1 and mastery test 2 was done by 7 students with different results, the so-called mastery level, 64% in the first mastery test and 55% in the second mastery test. And with this knowledge, you can go into class. You can enter into the in-class meeting. Now, the in-class meeting itself looks like this. And here you find a video, which is German. That's why I switched off the tone, where you see my position is, even in this old lecture hall, we didn't have any other room, is among the students, advising them. They are solving certain problems. Here they have to develop in the course History of English a Neanderthal language based on their background in language history and phonetics. Very difficult. And I keep supporting the students in this particular class. On the right, you see my position, typical position inside the students. Here on top, here you see a tutor, again in this old lecture hall, where we have to squeeze ourselves into these classes. And here in this image, you see a seminar with 25 participants where students gather around a table and solve a particular task. So what do we do in class? We advise, we support, we train competencies, but we do not teach anymore. This is really very important. So this is a blueprint about the in-class meeting, a blueprint which covers 90 minutes in class meeting. My first point is always I announce the badges. That seems to be very motivating. If I come in and say 90% of the students who are here at the moment have gained the badge so-and-so with an average of 87%. And 2 of you, whoever they are, I know them at that point, have not been awarded a badge. Then I use Pingo, the system I used earlier on. For live voting, I always have 2 to 3 questions, content and knowledge questions, where I once more want to have confirmed that the students actually know the answers. And by the way, if they present wrong answers, I can comment on that answer and thus do a little bit of frontal teaching. Isn't that what we still want? A little bit of frontal presence in class is still what we want, and there we can have it. Then I repeat a little bit because students might have asked some questions over the week. And I'm using a system called pigeonhole.at, where students can ask questions and can evaluate the questions and thus grade them and give them a higher or lower degree of importance. And then I introduce the new competencies, and then we train and finally discuss the results. And the execution is simply either in class, video conference. Before Corona, I had one video conference where I was away in Berlin for a presentation and the students needed me. And online, well, this doesn't really work. And the Corona, well, during Corona, we did the same. However, we divided the class into cohorts where we actually have the class divided into 2 cohorts, one from A to K and one from L to M, and reduce the in-class time a little bit, but the courses themselves were not affected. Here is another thing that comes in class. I told you earlier on, evaluation. Every 4 weeks, I keep asking my students not only questions in class, but also how good they are in certain competencies. For example, here you find the formative competence check after session 4 in a particular course. The link at the bottom leads you to that document, so you can actually see the document, where students have to define how good they are in particular competencies. I can draw morphological trees, for example, well, okay, badly. And depending on their answer, I can direct the in-class meetings from now on. A very, very efficient method. Okay, and what else do we have to do? Well, physical changes. This is another video in German, but you see what we have to do here. In order to arrange the in-class meeting, I have my student team services who arrange the tables so that we can work here. Now the tables have 6 chairs for the students and 1 for me, where we can sit and advise the students of what to do at a particular time. Sometimes the students simply say, please stay on your own, Mr. Handke, we have work to do. Just sit down, we will call you. That's the in-class meeting. I'm not saying anything about the cohort model because you can find this in our channel, the corona-related changes in the cohorts. But what I want to say is something about the new concepts, which are absolutely important in order to make such models work. I keep saying, as long as we talk about a lecture, we will actually have lectures. So we can have to get rid of some terms. Now, a lecture is not a model of teaching and learning in the 21st century anymore. We still have talks and inputs, but not the lecture where one academic stands in front of an audience 14 times per semester and talks about Mechanics 1 or the Old Testament in theology. And several colleagues do the same thing at different locations at the same time. This is no longer a model of the 21st century, so we should get rid of that word lecture. Also, lecture hall is no longer adequate. These row architectures, they are models of the past. We need new architectures and new concepts, so let's call it learning space. And the teacher is no longer a teacher who stands in front of an audience and instructs them and delivers content, but the teacher has become a coach or a guide. And considering the wealth of material which I introduced to you earlier on in the astronomy course, well, we have to adhere to one general motto. The digitization of teaching, if we actually want to do it, can only succeed through collaboration. That is, you have to work together with your colleagues and with a corresponding mindset. The mindset means you have to be in a position and you have to accept that you share material with your colleagues, which in Germany is a big problem. And the motto is don't talk, do it. That's my motto, and that almost finishes my talk, but let me now give an outlook to the two phases that are coming after this presentation. Now, this is what we did today. We talked about the foundations. We should now be in a position to understand the main scenarios and the scenario which I think is the most suitable one for teaching and learning, and for teaching and learning knowledge, basic knowledge of a subject in the 21st century. You still have other classes where you enter into discourse, so very much discourse-related seminars, laboratory settings, and so on. But here we're talking about basic knowledge. And these are the scenarios, the inverted classroom mastery model, maybe with additional tutoring. We talked about the felicity conditions. Here they are once more, summarized in a text format. This should be the result of what we've just done. In the meantime, between now and the 25th of November, I invite you to become part of this particular online course in order to experience self-paced learning, documentation, and assessment. Here are the instructions of what to do. Step 1, go to the platform whose URL you see here, then create a new account unless you have one. Then confirm your account via email, and then look for this course, Education in the 21st Century, 21st Century Education, OEB. It suffices, I think, if you just type in the search window OEB, and then self-enroll to the class by typing the enrollment key OEB 22. And you have 4 weeks' time to do the first 2 units, not more. The first is about traditional teaching and learning. The second unit is about digital teaching and learning. If you wish, you can, of course, look at all the other units as well. Units about assessment, about educational robotics, about learning analytics, and so on. So this is now your task to do that. And in Berlin, on the 25th of November, we will look at deployment. We will then create digital content. Here you find an example. This is what the digital content looks like: video, text, images, correctly referenced, and so on. And we will look at electronic assessment. Here you see an assessment from a drag and drop task where you have to mark particular areas on the moon, obviously taken from the astronomy course. This is what we will do in Berlin. And in Berlin, I will just say welcome, and then we start working. So I hope you got the maximum information today. You know the teaching and learning model. You know the principles of the felicity conditions, and you know what's coming up next. That's all I have to say. Finally, I want to look at the chat again. And let me go from top to bottom. When it comes to learning spaces, what design do you suggest? What do you think it should look like? Is a question. Well, look at our courses, then you know what sort of learning design we have created in our linguistics classes, in our general classes, and maybe 10th of November in our astronomy course. Each subject is a little bit different. So you should think about different disciplines and different components of these learning spaces. But learning spaces in a physical way, you mean the architectures, possibly. That's someone, De Beer, who asked this question. We cannot rebuild our universities right now. But what we can do, for example, is we can take old furniture and put rolls underneath each leg of a table. Then it's easier to move them around. That would be my suggestion. How do you get your colleagues and administrators to follow these ideas and really spend time and energy in everything, and energy in making everything? I can't. Because the reluctance in Germany is a maximum of reluctance you could think of. People at the moment are not willing to share. There are well-designed and well-appreciated techniques and options of building open educational resources. However, they're not taken. People find it very hard, especially in Germany, to share material, to share something other people have created in the digital world. It was not so with books, but with digital content, this is an amazing reluctance. Are you working on virtual 3D learning spaces in metaverse with avatars? No, we're dealing with avatars at the moment. I wanted to create my avatar today, but maybe I can create it in Berlin or in the meantime. It's at the moment developed at the RWTH in Aachen in the project My Space, where an avatar of mine will become part of our platform. So that's on the agenda. What reporting tools do you use on the backend to produce students' engagement? We use the forums. The platform you see here, the platform is a Moodle platform, and we're using all Moodle tools. And we use the tools that are available on the web, even Google Docs and Google Drive. So, final question. Are you going to award badges in Berlin? That's a nice question. Everyone who turns up in Berlin will receive a personal handshake and I think a document from OEB. That's a nice contribution at the end. So unless you have any more contributions, I would say thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed these 50 minutes, and I hope you now not only know why the Virtual Linguistics Campus is relatively successful, but also that you understand the principles I fully support in the 21st century. Thank you very much for having attended.